So now that we have a bit of insight on how to use the helpers and create new methods, basically generate new methods, we can continue cleaning up our code. Because believe me, when we're through with this, it should be around 100 lines of code, ignoring the fact that there's even more lines of code in here. But in general, by building these methods, we will be able to reduce the code. And if, let's say, the code isn't repeating, you will be able to make it at least a bit more readable. So in our case, we also know that we have very simple places where we can change it up a bit. So what does this line do? If we go to the menu, which is we already moved it to a method, stats. So we can just extract a method, control dot, and then type in print stats and press enter. It also takes parameters, so it would be able to print them out for us, which is very good. That's what we intend. Now we can also extract another method, which is, if we look in the menu, it's credits. So print credits. The naming convention, when we're naming methods, always keep in mind that they have to be as obvious and descriptive as possible. So as you can see, all our methods basically explain themselves what they are doing. So what does this do? It just prints a logo. What does this do? It just prints player menu info. Everything has to be descriptive, and that it wouldn't require you to document it, mm, at least in a very descriptive way. I'll later on teach you how to create summaries. Basically, when you type in 3 slashes, you get a summary snippet, and you can describe this method. Let's say it prints out a logo. And if we go back to the place where we call this, which is here, we can even see the description. It prints out a logo. It's good to document these methods, but with this small size of an application, it's really not worth the hassle unless you would go into production. And later on, when we will learn clean code, I will be teaching you some practices regarding that. But for now, let's just continue doing what we were doing, extracting methods. I will be changing the way that we deal with total card score. Um, when we will be creating a card hit or hit card methods, let's say when a player draws a new card, we will want to have some variable that we can access from methods a bit easier, and that we would be able to calculate the total score outside of main scope. So what we can do is just declare it would be player total card score equal 0, and control D will duplicate it, and we will also make a dealer total card score. We can also create a method to obtain the initial information about the player. So let's extract a method, and you will see that we also receive out keywords for these values. And we can probably name it set initial player information. I think it sums it up pretty well. We can probably keep this logic over here and not move it because I want the responsibility of setting initial player information to just be the setting part, not some error handling or some edge case scenario handling and stuff like that. Yeah, so next we have how many total games has a player played. We can change, I think, even this whole part because what these code lines do, they're basically getting player skill level, and we're just setting it. So we can basically extract a method and rename it to set player skill level and leave it like this. It already looks a lot cleaner than before. I will put a new line here because this seems a lot different than these method calls. The next thing that we need to do is probably move these lines of code into a method so we can extract it again. We should call it probably reset player stat. It makes the most sense. Then and now we have to take care of the biggest flow of them all. One thing that I'll restructure is how we currently generate these numbers. I really don't like the way we're handling this. So I'll introduce you with a new method called HitCard. Right now we're basically uh, just getting a random number, but there is a lot of logic that is repeating itself. So what I would like these methods to rather do, um it would probably be hit cards, and you can type it down like I just did. Even if the method doesn't exist, you can just type it out, then click control dot and generate a method. Now, when we go to this implementation, we can see that it doesn't have an assigned, well, it has an object assigned. Object is basically anything in C Sharp, so just don't forget to change it to the real type, to the real return type. Um, in our case, I imagine that we will need to know who is actually pulling the card. It could be called hitter role, maybe. I don't know. We will think about it later, and I'll make this method, this method parameter optional by assigning it a player value. So we will be able to just call this method simply by typing in this, and it would still work, as you can see. Although it does return a type, so it might fail anyway, but it throws an exception. Um, and some of the things that I will want it to do are uh, I will need a random class instantiated, that's for sure, because I want that number to be instantiated right here. We can create score variable, which will store all that information over here. Nice. For some reason, it's a bit upset. Oh, sleepy me. Then we have two types of puller roles right now. One is the player, which is the default, and the other one is the dealer. And I want this method to be very reusable for as many players as we have, as many roles as we would have. We could extend this method and make a lot of new changes which would adapt to different situations. So in here, we can just check if the puller role is actually the player. And if it actually is, then we want to add player total card score. We want to do this. Like I've mentioned, I'm not a big fan of static variables, but in this case, we can make our development a lot easier because it's a small application, let's be honest. We can just take all of these variables, Control X to cut it, uh, and just type it above your main method. You will be required to type in the word static unless it's a const. Consts don't change, and however it would be, it's considered very friendly towards global scopes. It's a lot better to use than static, but like I've mentioned, it's a small application. And later on, I will introduce you to classes, and we will move everything to classes. As for right now, we can just make these variables static, and we will be able to use them in our methods, which is very useful. Let's say right now we have these parameters, but we are able to remove all of them, and we will still be able to access all of those variables. So just clean up your methods right now. Remove all the parameters from every method that you have. Yeah, we will implement this a bit later, but right now we need to check out where we find other squiggly lines so we can see that there are no parameters in this one. We can see that there are no parameters in this method call. These are the same issues that we are not using HitCard. Same goes for this part. We need to remove arguments here, arguments here. And now we can see that the code is getting a lot more clean. And we can access player total card score from here, which is super nice and super easy to navigate through. Okay, so we have other scenario when the puller role is not a player. Later on, when we'll introduce multiplayer, we will be able to add more players using collections, and we will be navigating through lists. But for now, we have two players, and what we will need to do is basically the same thing as we did with the player. Just add the sum of the card score, and then we can add some text. I'll want I'll basically want this whole text to be over here, so we will be able to reuse it. And this one will belong to this part, and in here we will change it to red. We will also change this text to be a lot more generic. So we can make puller roll. We can print out puller roll is drawing a card, and then we can even specify what is the score of the card that was pulled, like this. So basically, as you can see, it just prints it out. And since we need to return something, we can just return the card score, because it is the next random number that we generate. And if we go back, we will be able to see that we can actually change it everywhere right now. Here, here. But like as you can see that the player is the default, in here we need to specify that the puller role is the dealer. And we will actually need to change it to first dealer card, second dealer card. And what I would like to do is probably in real life situation, we would probably let the dealer draw after the player has drawn. So we can just do it like this. We can also turn this into a method, which should be called print new game message. We will also need some additional logic, which would be for our total scores. So we will need to reset it every new round that the player starts. And we can move this to a new method as well. So as you can see, we are calling a method inside the method. And we can call it prepare new rounds. Thank you for listening. In part 3, we will finish cleaning, upgrading, and refactoring the code, as well as we will do our C# methods homework. Hop on and let's get going with our fantastical developer journey.